What I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about evil, about trust, about the person sitting next to you in class, at work, in line at the grocery store. For college kids, beautiful, brilliant, living their best lives, and a PhD student who spent his professors saw it coming. They warned each other. They said he'd hurt someone. But nobody could have imagined this. Bryan Kohberger wasn't just studying criminology. He was writing his dissertation on how criminals think, how they choose victims, how they avoid getting caught. And then he became his own case study. What happened on November 13, 2022, wasn't just murder. It was the most twisted academic experiment ever conducted. And when I tell you the 3 revelations that will come out of this story, the third one is going to haunt you forever. But first, you need to subscribe. Because what these 4 incredible souls teach us about courage, about love, about fighting back against the darkness, it could save your life. Madison Mogan, 21 years old, marketing major. The girl who lit up every room she entered, whose smile could cure depression, whose laugh was so infectious that strangers would turn around just to see what joy looked like. Kaylee Goncalves, 21. General Studies. Maddie's best friend, her sister in every way that mattered. They were planning to move to Austin together, to start their adult lives side by side, the way they'd done everything since they were kids. Xana Kernadal, 20 years old. Marketing and Information Systems. The achiever, the one with plans and dreams and a future mapped out like a treasure map to success. And Ethan Chapin, 20. Recreation, Sport, and Tourism Management. Xana's boyfriend of over a year. The kind of guy who opened doors, who made her parents love him, who was already talking about forever. November 12, 2022. A Saturday night in Moscow, Idaho. Population, 25,000. The kind of college town where the biggest worry is whether the football team will win, where parents send their kids because it's safe, wholesome, good. The girls had been out at a local sports bar. Ethan and Xana had been at a fraternity party. They all came home to 1122 King Road, a 6-bedroom house they shared with 2 other roommates. Home. The one place in the world where you're supposed to be safe. Where you let your guard down. Where you sleep without fear. They had no idea that death was studying them. That evil was taking notes. That somewhere in the darkness, a monster with a PhD was putting his research into practice. But here's what nobody knew then, what wouldn't come out until after his arrest. Bryan Kohberger had been watching them for weeks. And what he was doing during those weeks, it's going to make you check every lock in your house tonight. Bryan Christopher Kohberger, 28 years old. PhD student in criminology and criminal justice at Washington State University. Clean-cut. Intelligent. The kind of man you'd trust to walk you to your car. But behind those glasses, behind that academic exterior, was a mind that had turned the study of crime into an obsession with committing it. Listen to this, really listen. His professors were so concerned about his behavior that they warned each other he was stalking people. A Washington State University professor had warned coworkers that Bryan Kohberger could potentially stalk and sexually abuse future students, just weeks before the murders. Other people in the department pegged him as a potential incel and possible future rapist. They knew. They saw the darkness. They recognized the predator. But here's where it gets truly chilling. A colleague told police he believed Kohberger attempted to use his authority as a TA to inappropriately interact with female students. He was using his position of power, his academic authority, to hunt. Think about this. This wasn't some random psychopath who snapped. This was a calculated, educated, methodical predator who spent years learning how killers think, how they operate, how they choose victims. He was literally writing his dissertation on the criminal mind while planning to become the subject of his own research. But the most terrifying part? Idaho officials came to believe that Kohberger was certainly stalking the neighborhood where the victims lived. This wasn't random. This wasn't opportunistic. This was a PhD thesis in murder. And here's twist number 1, the revelation that's going to make your blood run cold. Bryan Kohberger didn't just study these girls from afar. Someone had reportedly broken into a female graduate student's apartment in September or October, stealing perfume and underwear. He was collecting trophies. He was practicing. He was rehearsing for the main event. The fox wasn't just guarding the henhouse. He was studying the blueprint, learning the security system, and planning the perfect slaughter. But how did 4 innocent college kids end up in the crosshairs of an academic assassin? The answer involves a level of stalking so sophisticated, so methodical, that it reads like a horror novel. And when you hear what he did to prepare, you're going to understand why some evil wears a cap and gown. November 13, 2022, 1:30 a.m. While most of America slept peacefully in their beds, 4 beautiful souls were about to face the unthinkable. 11:22, King Road was quiet. Maddie and Kaylee had made it home from their night out. They'd ordered food, posted on social media, done all the normal things that normal 21-year-olds do on a Saturday night. On the second floor, Ethan and Xana were in her bedroom. Young love, safe and warm and planning for tomorrow. On the third floor, Maddie and Kaylee were in Kaylee's room, probably talking about their move to Austin, about their future, about all the dreams they'd never get to live. In the basement, 2 other roommates slept, unaware that the house above them was about to become a crime scene. And somewhere in the darkness outside, Bryan Kohberger was putting on gloves, checking his knife, and preparing to turn his academic research into a real-world experiment. In the early morning hours of November 13, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle, were fatally stabbed. But those clinical words don't tell you what really happened. They don't tell you about the courage, the love, the desperate fight for life. Goncalves was stabbed more than 30 times and had defensive wounds. 30 times. Think about that. Think about the strength it took to keep fighting. Think about the love that made her protect her best friend until her final breath. Kernodle was in an intense struggle for her life and suffered over 50 stab wounds. 50. This brave, beautiful girl fought like a warrior. She didn't go quietly. She didn't give up. But here's what breaks my heart and fills me with rage at the same time. The bodies of Kaylee Goncalves and Maddie Mogen were together in a bed. Together. In their final moments, when hell came to their door, they faced it side by side. Best friends in life. Best friends in death. Angels who held each other as they left this world. Ethan Chapin's fatal injury was from a stab wound under his left clavicle which severed his subclavian vein and subclavian artery, and also his jugular vein was severed. This beautiful boy, this loving boyfriend, died protecting the girl he loved. But here's what's going to haunt me forever, and what should terrify every parent, every student, every person who thinks they're safe in their own home. There were survivors in that house. 2 roommates who heard everything, who lived through the nightmare. And what they experienced that night, it's going to change how you think about survival, about courage, and about the thin line between life and death. Dylan Mortensen, Bethany Funk. 2 college girls whose names should have remained unknown, who should have just been roommates, friends, normal students living normal lives. Instead, they became the witnesses to hell on earth. Newly released body camera footage revealed the harrowing moments an officer responded to the University of Idaho murder scene after the survivors called 911. But what that footage doesn't show, what we've only learned from police reports, is the horror that Dylan experienced that night. Picture this, you're a college student. You're in your room. And you start hearing noises upstairs. Not party noises. Not music. Not laughter. Sounds that make your blood run cold. Dylan heard crying. She heard a man's voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." She heard a dog barking. She heard screaming. And then, silence. The kind of silence that's louder than screaming. She opened her door. She looked out. And there, in the hallway of her own home, she saw a figure in black walking toward the sliding glass door. A stranger. In her house. Where her friends were. She closed the door. She locked it. And she waited. For 6 hours, she waited. Paralyzed by fear, by shock, by the kind of terror that freezes your soul. Can you imagine? Can you even begin to imagine what those 6 hours were like? Wondering if your friends were okay. Wondering if the man in black was still there. Wondering if you were next. At 11:58 a.m., nearly 12 hours after the murders, 911 was finally called. Not by Dylan. Not by Bethany. But by friends who had come to check on the girls. Because here's the thing about trauma, about shock, about facing evil, it doesn't make you brave. It doesn't make you heroic. It makes you human. Terrified, confused, struggling to process the impossible. Dylan Mortensen saved her own life that night by staying quiet, by staying hidden, by making the hardest decision any young person should ever have to make, letting her friends die to save herself. She's been called a coward by some. Criticized for not calling 911 sooner. Blamed for surviving when others didn't. But I'm here to tell you, Dylan Mortensen is a hero. She survived. She became the key witness. She's the reason Bryan Kohberger is behind bars. Because what Dylan saw that night, what she was able to tell police, it led to the most sophisticated manhunt in Idaho history. And when you hear how they caught this monster, you're going to understand that sometimes surviving is the bravest thing you can do. For 47 days, America held its breath. Who killed 4 innocent college students? How could someone walk into a house full of people and disappear like a ghost? The FBI set up a command center. Idaho State Police worked around the clock. Tips poured in by the thousands. Everyone had a theory. Everyone knew someone who looked suspicious. But the killer? He was hiding in plain sight. 60 miles away. At Washington State University. Attending classes. Grading papers. Living his normal academic life. Because here's twist number 2, the revelation that shows just how arrogant, how confident, how absolutely convinced of his own genius Bryan Kohberger really was. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He didn't even change his routine. This man who had spent years studying how criminals get caught thought he was smarter than every detective in America. He thought his PhD made him untouchable. He thought he had committed the perfect crime. He was wrong. Because while Bryan Kohberger was busy congratulating himself on his criminal masterpiece, digital forensics experts were building an invisible net around him. His cell phone had pinged towers near the victim's house 12 times. In the weeks leading up to the murders, the wolf circling the lamb. Security cameras had captured his white Hyundai Elantra, the same car he tried to scrub clean after the murders, not knowing that luminol reveals what soap cannot wash away. But the smoking gun? The evidence that sealed his fate? DNA. A single-source DNA profile found on a knife sheath at the crime scene. The key evidence that linked Bryan Kohberger to the murders of 4 Idaho students. The criminology student who thought he understood forensics better than forensic scientists had left his calling card at the scene of the crime. December 30th, 2022, 3 a.m. Monroe County, Pennsylvania. Bryan Kohberger was arrested at his parents' house. He was home for Christmas break, probably feeling safe, probably thinking he'd gotten away with it. Picture that moment. The knock on the door. The FBI agents. The handcuffs clicking into place. The look on his face when he realized that all his academic arrogance, all his criminal knowledge, all his careful planning, had failed. The student had become the subject. The researcher had become the research. The hunter had become the hunted. But what happened next, what Bryan Kohberger did when he realized he'd been caught, it's going to restore your faith in justice and prove that even the most evil among us can't escape the weight of conscience forever. May 22nd, 2025. Lotta County Courthouse. The trial the world had been waiting for was about to begin. For 2.5 years, Bryan Kohberger had maintained his innocence. His defense team had filed motion after motion, challenging evidence, questioning procedures, doing everything possible to create reasonable doubt. The families had prepared themselves for a long, brutal trial. They'd steeled themselves to hear the details of their children's final moments. They'd prepared to face their children's killer and demand justice. And then something unprecedented happened. Something that shocked even seasoned legal experts. Something that no one saw coming. May 22, 2025, 9:47 a.m. Bryan Kohberger stood up in open court and spoke two words that changed everything. Guilty, Your Honor. Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to life in prison last month after he pled guilty to killing 4 University of Idaho students. But here's twist number 3, the revelation that proves that guilt is a living, breathing, consuming force that devours evil from the inside out. He broke. This man who thought he was smarter than everyone, who believed his academic credentials made him untouchable, who spent 2.5 years claiming innocence. He looked at those families, at the parents who had buried their children, at the siblings who would never laugh with their brothers and sisters again, at the friends who had lost their chosen family, and he couldn't lie anymore. The weight of 4 beautiful souls, for stolen futures, for families destroyed, it was too much even for a monster to carry. Do you know what this means? Do you understand the power of what happened in that courtroom? Evil confessed. Darkness acknowledged light. The man who thought he was God admitted he was just another broken human being who had done the unthinkable. Hundreds of documents were released by police after Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to life in prison for the murders of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. And what those documents revealed, it shows that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about truth. It's about acknowledgement. It's about finally, giving these 4 incredible souls the recognition they deserved. Madison Mogen didn't die in vain. Her light forced darkness to confess. Kaylee Goncalves didn't die in vain. Her courage brought a coward to his knees. Xana Kernodle didn't die in vain. Her fight exposed a predator for what he really was. Ethan Chapin didn't die in vain. His love protected everyone who came after. Because their story doesn't end with Bryan Kohberger's confession. It doesn't end with his life sentence. It doesn't even end with justice. Their real legacy, what these 4 beautiful souls gave to the world, it's something that's going to make you believe in the power of love over evil, light over darkness, and hope over despair. July 23, 2025. Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He'll die behind bars, forgotten, irrelevant, a footnote in the story of 4 incredible lives. But you know what won't die? You know what can't be imprisoned? You know what evil could never touch? The love between Madison and Kaylee. Best friends who held each other in their final moments and showed the world what loyalty looks like. The courage of Xana, who fought with everything she had and proved that some people never surrender. The devotion of Ethan, who died protecting the girl he loved and showed us what real manhood looks like. The strength of Dylan, who survived and became the voice for those who couldn't speak. That's not tragedy. That's triumph. That's not defeat. That's victory. That's not the end of their story. That's the beginning of their legend. Listen to me. Really listen. Evil exists. Real, tangible, walking among us evil. There are Bryan Kohbergers in PhD programs, in offices, in neighborhoods, in places of trust and authority. There are predators studying their prey, monsters wearing masks of normalcy. But you know what else exists? You know what's more powerful than any evil? Love that transcends death. Friendship that survives hell. Courage that inspires generations. Truth that destroys lies. Light that conquers darkness. Here's what Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan taught us. Trust your instincts. A professor warned about Kohberger weeks before the murders. Someone knew. Someone saw the signs. Stay together. These friends died together, but they also fought together. They protected each other even in death. Technology saves lives. Digital forensics caught this killer when everything else failed. Survivors matter. Dylan's testimony was crucial. Sometimes living through hell is the bravest thing you can do. Evil doesn't win. It might have moments of triumph, but love always gets the last word. And most importantly, they taught us that ordinary people, college students, young adults just figuring out life, can be heroes, can be legends, can change the world just by being themselves, by loving each other, by refusing to let darkness define their story. Bryan Kohberger thought he was writing the story. He thought he was the main character. He thought his PhD, his research, his academic arrogance made him special. But he was wrong. He was just the villain, the obstacle, the darkness that makes the light shine brighter. Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan? They're the heroes. They're the main characters. They're the ones whose story will be remembered, honored, and celebrated. Because that's how love works. That's how courage works. That's how truth works. It doesn't matter how much evil schemes, how much darkness plans, how much hatred prepares. Love always wins. Always. I know this was hard to hear. I know it hurt. I know that right now you might be feeling overwhelmed by the darkness, by the evil, by the fact that monsters like Bryan Kohberger exist. But that's not why I told you this story. I told you this story because Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin deserve to be remembered not as victims, but as heroes. Not as footnotes in a killer's story, but as the main characters in their own legend. Here's what you can do right now. Share this video. Not for me, but for them. Let their story reach everyone who needs to hear it. Support the families who have turned their grief into advocacy, their pain into purpose. Pay attention to the people around you. Trust your instincts. Remember that Bryan Kohberger's professors saw the warning signs, so can you. Check on your friends. Love your family. Tell people how much they mean to you while you still can. And most importantly, live with the courage these four showed us. Love as fiercely as they loved. Fight as bravely as they fought. Shine as brightly as they shined. Because that's how we honor them. Not with sadness, but with strength. Not with fear, but with fearlessness. Not by forgetting, but by remembering that love is stronger than hate, that good is more powerful than evil, and that some lights shine so brightly they can never be extinguished. Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan were 20 and 21 years old when they showed the world what heroism looks like. What's your excuse? Hit that like button if this story moved you. Subscribe if you believe that love conquers all. And comment below with how you plan to live with Idaho for courage. Until next time, remember, evil may win battles, but love wins wars. Always and forever. In memory of Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. Heroes. Legends. Forever loved.